I just opened the wrong door. There's a wedding happening in this room. My husband is standing at the altar. And the bride isn't me. Keisha, I'm in my work apron. I came here to cater an event. I should be screaming. I should be running. But something is wrong with this picture, Bestie. And I can't stop staring at it.
Bestie, help! I accidentally walked into my Korean Mafia boss husband's secret wedding room, and the bride wasn't me. I just opened the wrong door. There's a wedding happening in this room. My husband is standing at the altar. And the bride isn't me. Keisha, I'm in my work apron. I came here to cater an event. A private function, the agency said. Top dollar, total secrecy. I married this man 11 months ago, quietly. No guests. He said it had to be a secret to keep me safe. And now he's marrying someone else in a room full of men with guns, and nobody told me. I should be screaming. I should be running. But something is wrong with this picture, Bestie, and I can't stop staring at it. The bride is crying too. Not happy crying, the other kind. And my husband isn't looking at her like a man in love. He's looking at the door like a man counting his exits. There's a man at the head of the room I've never seen, smiling like he already won. And here's the thing nobody in this room knows. 11 months ago, my husband didn't just marry me. He handed me something. Something he told me to never let go of. I came in here as the help. But I'm the only person in this building who can stop this wedding. They just don't know it yet. Bestie, stay on the phone. Here's what's about to happen. Step 1, the betrayals I walked into. My husband at another woman's altar. Step 2, the moment I realize this isn't a wedding at all. It's a trap, and I'm not the only victim in this room. Step 3 is where everything flips, because the paper in my apron proves this whole empire was never theirs to trade. Step 4, the moment the man who built this scheme realizes the waitress he hired to pour champagne owns the ground he's standing on. And step 5, the moment I stop being silent, flip the whole table, and walk out with everything. Stay with me, Bestie, because the second I open my mouth in this room, everything changes. Okay, let me back up because you need to understand how I even got here. 4 hours ago, I was just trying to pick up an extra catering shift. I work for a high-end events agency, the kind that staffs the parties rich people don't want photographed. You sign a stack of confidentiality forms. You keep your eyes down. You pour the champagne. You go home. Good money, no questions. And here's something you should know about me before I tell you the rest. I am very good at being invisible. I've had a lot of practice. When you grow up the way I did, moving a lot, never the richest kid in the room, learning early to read situations fast and keep your head down, you get good at being the person nobody really looks at. For most of my life, that felt like a curse. Like I was built to be background. It turns out being the person nobody looks at is its own kind of secret identity. You can stand in the middle of a room full of powerful people, holding the one thing they'd kill for, and not a single one of them will see you. I just didn't know yet that my whole invisible life had been training me for one specific afternoon. This morning, my manager called me. Noelle, I've got a last-minute private function, big one. The client asked for you specifically. That should have been my first clue. Nobody asks for the waitress by name, but rent is rent. So I said yes. The address was a private estate, an hour outside the city. Gold gates, a driveway longer than my whole street. The kind of place where the flowers cost more than my car. 20 staff, all of us briefed in a side room by a nervous catering captain who kept checking his watch. You see nothing, he told us. You hear nothing. You especially say nothing online. The client has eyes everywhere. I should have walked out right then. Briefings like that don't happen at normal parties. But the second I walked into the staff entrance, my best friend Keisha texted me, because Keisha has a sixth sense for when I'm about to do something stupid. Where are you? You went quiet. I texted back, catering some rich guy's party, fancy estate, I'll send pics. And Keisha, my ride or die, the most suspicious woman God ever made, texted back 3 words that I should have listened to. Something feels off. I rolled my eyes. I typed, it's just a party inge, and I put my phone in my apron pocket. Bestie, write this down. When Keisha says something feels off, leave, because I didn't. And that's how I ended up standing in a doorway, in a catering apron, watching my husband marry another woman. Here's how it happened. I was carrying a tray of champagne flutes down a hallway I wasn't supposed to be in. I'd gotten turned around. The estate was a maze of gold and marble, and the catering captain had sent me to the West Salon without telling me. There were 4 of them. Every door looked the same. Tall, dark wood, gold handles, so I picked one. I balanced the tray on my hip. I pushed the handle down and I opened it, and the whole world stopped. It was a ballroom, enormous. Chandeliers like frozen waterfalls. White roses everywhere. Thousands of them, climbing an arch at the front of the room. Candles. A white runner down the centre. A wedding. And standing at the front in a black suit, with his back half turned to me, was my husband, Hyun Woo. I knew the line of his shoulders before I knew anything else. I've fallen asleep against those shoulders. I knew the tattoo creeping up the side of his neck, the one I used to trace with my finger on Sunday mornings. I knew him, and beside him, in a wedding dress that probably cost 6 figures, with a veil and a tiara and a bouquet of white roses, was a woman I had never seen in my life. The tray slipped out of my hands. It didn't shatter. It just dropped onto the runner with a muffled crash, champagne soaking into white silk, and every single head in that room turned to look at me. The bride. The man at the head of the room. The dozen men in black suits standing along the walls. And Hyun-woo. My husband turned all the way around, and his eyes found mine. And the look on his face, Bestie. I have replayed that look 1,000 times. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't, oh no, I got caught. It was something else. Something I couldn't read yet. But in that second, I didn't see any of that. I just saw the dress and the roses, and the man I married standing next to a bride who wasn't me. And I felt my whole chest cave in. 11 months. 11 months of a marriage he said had to stay secret to keep me safe. 11 months of believing him. And here he was, in a room full of roses, marrying someone else, and I was the catering staff. I have never felt so small in my life. I have never felt so stupid. Standing in an apron, in a doorway, while the man I loved got married to another woman in front of an audience. And it wasn't just heartbreak. It was the public humiliation of it. That was the part that burned. It's one thing to be left. It's another thing to be left while you're holding a tray, in a uniform, in front of a room full of strangers who all turned to stare at the catering girl, who'd clearly just figured out something everyone else already knew. For one horrible second, I was sure that every person in that room understood exactly who I was and was watching me find out my marriage was a lie. The shame of it went all the way down to my shoes. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor to open up. 11 months of being a secret, and this was where it ended. Me on display, humiliated, in front of the very man who'd asked me to stay hidden. That's the feeling they count on, by the way. The people who underestimate you. They count on the shame keeping you frozen in the doorway. They count on you being too humiliated to do anything but run. What they don't count on is the half-second after the shame, when something colder and clearer takes its place. If you've ever walked in on something that broke your whole world in 1 second, drop your city in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. I need to know I'm not the only one who's stood frozen in a doorway like this. Now, here's where it gets strange. This is the part I need you to pay attention to, because I almost missed it. I was about to turn and run. I had 1 foot already backing out the door. But Keisha's voice was in my head. Something feels off. And some part of me, even while my heart was breaking, started actually looking at the room. And the more I looked, the less it made sense. Wrong thing, number 1. The bride was crying. Not happy tears, I know the difference. This woman's face was pale, her eyes were red, and she was gripping that bouquet like it was the only thing keeping her standing. She looked at me, the random catering girl who just dropped a tray, with something like desperation, like she was begging me for something. A stranger. Wrong thing, number 2. There was no music. I have catered 100 weddings. There is always music. A string quartet, a playlist, something. This room was dead silent. The only sound was my tray hitting the floor. A wedding with no music isn't a celebration, it's a transaction. Wrong thing number 3. The guests. There were no guests. No grandmothers dabbing their eyes. No bridesmaids in matching dresses. No flower girls. Just 12 men in identical black suits, standing along the walls with their hands folded in front of them. And every single one of them had the same flat, watchful stillness. Bestie, those weren't guests, those were guards. Wrong thing number 4. My husband. Hyun-woo wasn't looking at his bride. In the 30 seconds I'd been standing there, he hadn't looked at her once. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. His hands were fists at his sides, and his eyes kept flicking. To the door behind me, to the windows, to the exits, counting them. I have seen my husband relaxed. I have seen him happy. This was neither. This was a man trapped in a room he couldn't leave. And wrong thing number 5, the one that changed everything. There was a man seated at the head of the room. Older, silver at his temples, in a suit that cost more than the others. And while everyone else in that room was frozen in shock at the tray I'd dropped, he was smiling. Calm, pleased, like a man watching a plan come together exactly the way he designed it. I didn't know who he was yet, but I knew that smile. It was the smile of the only person in the room who felt safe. And that's when it hit me, cold and clear through all the heartbreak. This wasn't a wedding my husband wanted. This was a wedding someone was doing to him. I should have run. Even then, even knowing something was wrong, the smart move was to back out that door and figure it out from somewhere safe. But I made eye contact with Hyun-woo, and my husband, the most controlled man I have ever known. A man who once negotiated with a room full of dangerous people without his pulse changing. My husband looked at me across that ballroom and his lips moved. One silent word. I couldn't tell at first what he was saying. I thought it was run. That's what it looked like. Run. But then he did something with his eyes. He looked at me, and then he looked, very deliberately, down at my apron pocket. The pocket where, 11 months ago, he'd told me to always keep a certain folded document, and then back up at me. And I realized the word wasn't run. It was now. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Keisha. I answered it without thinking, holding it low, my voice barely a whisper. Keisha, I breathed. I'm in so much trouble. Noel, what's wrong? Where are you? He's getting married. Hyun-woo, there's a wedding and the bride isn't me and I. Keisha, there are men with guns in here. There was a silence on the line. Then Keisha, who has talked me through every disaster of my adult life, said the thing that snapped me back into my body. Noel, listen to me. You did not get sent to that exact estate on that exact day by a client who asked for you by name, by accident. Somebody wanted you in that building. The question is whether it was the man smiling or your husband, and that, Bestie, is when the whole thing cracked open. The man at the head of the room stood up. He clapped his hands together, slow and amused, and the sound echoed off the marble. Well, he said, it seems we have an uninvited guest. The catering staff has wandered somewhere she shouldn't. He had a voice like silk over a knife. Smooth, pleasant, and underneath it, something that made the back of my neck go cold. 2 of the guards started moving toward me. Hyun-woo stepped forward, fast, sharp, and put himself half a step into their path. She's nobody, he said, and his voice was flat and hard. Staff, let her clean up the mess and go. But the older man held up a hand, and the guards stopped, and he tilted his head and looked at me. Really looked. The way a man looks at a card he's about to play. Is she, though? He said softly. Nephew, you've never been a good liar. Your whole face just changed. Nephew. So that's who he was. Hyun-woo's uncle. And the way he said nephew, there was no warmth in it. It was the word a man uses for someone he owns. He walked down the white runner toward me, slow and unhurried, stepping right over the spilled champagne, and he stopped a few feet away and studied my face. You know, he said, my nephew has been remarkably difficult these last 11 months. Stubborn. Distracted, refusing every advantageous match I arranged for him. He smiled. I always suspected there was a reason. A woman, perhaps. Something he was hiding. His eyes flicked to my left hand, to the thin band I'd never stopped wearing, even at work, even under my catering gloves, which I'd pulled off when I grabbed the tray. And here she is, pouring champagne at his arranged wedding. How poetic. Bestie, I want you to understand the danger I was in. This was not a man having a bad day. This was the head of a criminal family who had just discovered a loose thread in his plan. And men like that don't leave loose threads. But here's what he didn't know. He thought I was the loose thread. He had no idea I was the whole spool. Keisha was still in my ear, barely a whisper. Noelle, whatever's in that pocket, whatever your husband told you to keep, this is the moment. Whatever it is, it's why you're alive right now. The uncle, his name was Byung-shugul, I'd learn, turned away from me like I was already handled, and walked back toward the altar and started talking, bragging, really. Men like him always brag because they think the bragging is safe. And as he talked, the whole real picture came together. And Bestie, stay with me here, because this is the part where I finally understood what I'd actually walked into, and it is not what you think. Okay, so Yunwoo's family, the Jang organization, old, powerful, the kind of name people say carefully, but it had been bleeding power. Hyunwoo's father, the man who ran it, died about 1.5 years ago. And here's the thing, he hadn't left control in a way his brother could just grab. He'd locked it up somehow. Bai Young-chul, the smiling uncle, had been trying to pry it loose ever since and couldn't. So the uncle built a scheme. I'm telling you, the more he bragged, the more my stomach dropped. He arranged a marriage. The bride, Chae-won, the woman in white I'd been ready to hate 30 seconds ago, was the daughter of a rival family, the Do organization. Marry the two families together, and the merger would shake loose a transfer of control that put Byung-chul, the guy brokering the whole thing, at the top of the combined empire, and Hyunwoo forced into it. 1 year of pressure, threats against people he loved, his money choked off, every ally cut away, and finally today, dragged to the altar with 12 armed men in the room to make sure he said yes. And the bride, Bestie. Here's the part that broke me. She wasn't the other woman. She wasn't my rival. She was a prisoner too, sold into this by her own family for the exact same merger, against her will, terrified, gripping that bouquet because it was the only thing in the room she was allowed to hold. 2 prisoners, 1 wedding, and 1 smiling man who'd built the whole thing to steal an empire. The betrayal I thought I'd walked into wasn't a betrayal at all. It was a hostage situation with flowers. I looked across the room at Hyunwoo, and he was already looking at me, and now I could read his face. It wasn't guilt. It had never been guilt. It was a plea. And Bestie, I want to tell you how fast a heart can turn around. Because mine did it in about 10 seconds flat. 30 seconds earlier, I'd been certain this man had betrayed me in the most public, humiliating way possible. I'd been ready to walk out of his life forever. And now I was looking at the same man, in the same room, and seeing something completely different. A person who'd been backed into a corner so tight that the only move he'd left was to bet everything on. A waitress in a doorway. The story hadn't changed. Only my understanding of it had. That's the thing nobody warns you about. Sometimes the betrayal you walk into isn't a betrayal at all. Sometimes it's the worst day of someone else's life, and you just happen to open the door in the middle of it. He couldn't stop this. They'd taken away every move he had. But there was one thing his uncle didn't know existed. One card Hyunwoo had hidden so well that even 1 year of pressure hadn't found it. Me, and what I was carrying. Comment the word undeniable if you've ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea what you were actually holding. Tell me. I need to know I'm not the only one who let them keep talking while I waited for my moment. Okay, Bestie. This is the part where everything you think you know about this story flips. So stay with me. 11 months ago, when Hyunwoo married me in that quiet courthouse, with no guests, he gave me more than a ring. He gave me a folded document and a small gold object, a family seal, the kind that's been used to authorize the most important decisions in his family for 3 generations. And he told me something I didn't fully understand at the time. I need you to hear it the way I heard it, Bestie, because at the time it just sounded like sweet nothings from a man in love. It wasn't. It was the most important thing anyone has ever said to me, he said. My father didn't leave control of this family to a person. He left it to a holder, Whoever physically holds the founder's seal and the controlling certificate is the legal head of the Jang organization. My father did it this way on purpose because he knew my uncle would come for it. He knew the only way to protect it was to give it to the one person nobody would ever suspect. And then he'd looked at me. A waitress, a nobody, a woman with no connection to his world, and he'd said, "You! They'll never look at you. Keep these on yous always. Tell no one. As long as you hold them. My uncle can scheme all he wants, but he can never legally take control. The empire isn't mine to lose or his to take. It's yours to hold." I'd thought it was romantic, almost. A symbol. I didn't understand that he'd handed me the actual, literal, legal control of one of the most powerful criminal and business empires in the country, and hidden it inside a catering apron. And here's the shocking twist that I'm still not over, Bestie. For 11 months, I had been carrying the single most valuable object in my husband's entire world, and I'd kept it in a kitchen drawer next to the takeout menus. I'd worn it to work. I'd had it in my apron while I poured drinks for strangers. The legal head of the Jang organization had been refilling champagne flutes and clearing dirty plates, and the seal that controlled everything had been riding along in her pocket the entire time. And nobody, not the guards, not the rival families, not even me, had understood what it meant. But Byung-chul had figured out the document existed. He just didn't know where it was. That's why the forced marriage. He was trying to engineer a transfer of control through the merger because he couldn't find the seal to do it directly. He had built this entire wedding, threatened all these people, dragged his nephew to an altar at gunpoint, to seize control of an empire that, legally, already belonged to the woman pouring his champagne. I almost laughed. Right there in the doorway, with my heart still in pieces, I almost laughed because the audacity of it. This man thought he was minutes away from winning. And the thing he wanted was in my pocket the whole time. Keisha heard me breathing different. "Noelle," she whispered, "you've got that voice, the one you get right before you do something insane. What's in the pocket?" "Keisha," I whispered back, "I think I own everything." And Bestie, the second I said it out loud, something happened to me. 11 months of feeling like a secret, like a woman who wasn't good enough for the daylight, like the help. It all turned over inside me at once. This was my comeback, and it had been sitting in my apron pocket the entire time, waiting for me to understand what I was holding. I wasn't the catering girl who'd walked into the wrong room. I was the one person in that building who could end this. The glow-up wasn't going to be a new dress or a new face. It was a woman standing up to her full height in a room that had spent the whole night looking right through her. But here's what I had to figure out fast, Bestie, because holding the seal wasn't the same as being safe. I did the math in about 4 seconds, standing in that doorway, and it went like this. If I just turned and ran with the seal, Byung-chul would send every man in that room after me, and I would not make it to the parking lot. A folded document doesn't stop a bullet. If I stayed quiet and let the wedding happen, then even if the merger somehow failed later, I'd have wasted the one moment when surprise was on my side. And Byung-chul would have time to figure out where the seal was and take it from me at his leisure. If I screamed about owning everything with no proof, I'd just be a hysterical catering girl, and they'd remove me, and that would be that. There was exactly one move that worked. One. I had to reveal what I was holding in front of witnesses, in front of the guards specifically, in a way that was undeniable, legally clear, and impossible to walk back. Because the guards were the whole game. Byung-chul's power in that room wasn't his own muscle, it was borrowed. It was 12 armed men who followed whoever they believed held authority. The second, those men understood, with their own eyes, where the real power lived. Byung-chul would have nothing but a nice suit and a smile. It was just like a puzzle with one solution. Reveal the seal, make it undeniable. Flip the guards. Everything else fell apart on its own after that. Keisha was still in my ear. "Noelle, talk to me, what are you doing?" "I'm about to do the insane thing," I whispered. "Stay on the line. If this goes wrong, you call Grace and you tell her everything." "Noelle, I love you, Bestie. Watch this." And I stepped over the spilled champagne, into the room. Byung-chul had just turned to the man officiating, some nervous functionary holding a folder, and said, "Enough delays. Continue the ceremony." And I said it, loud and clear so it carried all the way to the back wall. "You can't continue. The ceremony is legally meaningless, and I can prove it." The whole room went still. Byung-chul turned around slowly, that smile still, on his face but tighter now, the patience wearing thin. "The catering girl has opinions," he said. "How charming. Remove her." 2 guards moved toward me. "I wouldn't," I said. "Because if anything happens to me, the founder's seal of the Jiang family disappears, and you will never, ever find it. And without it, this merger transfers control of exactly nothing." Byung-chul's smile froze. For the first time, it slipped. "What did you say?" I reached into my apron pocket. The guards tensed, and I pulled out the folded document and the small gold seal, and I held them up so the light caught the gold, and I watched the blood drain out of Byung-chul's face. He knew exactly what he was looking at. Of course he did. He'd been hunting it for a year. "This is the founder's certificate," I said, "and the family seal. Whoever holds these is the legal head of the Jiang organization. That's how Hyun-woo's father set it up. That's the whole reason your little merger scheme exists. Because you couldn't find these, so you tried to engineer control through a marriage instead." I looked around the room, at the guards, at the terrified bride, at my husband. "Well, here they are, and they're not in his name." I nodded at Hyun-woo. "And they're definitely not in yours." "Then whose?" Byung-chul said, and his voice had gone quiet and dangerous. I'd had 11 months to not understand what I was holding. I understood it now. "Mine," I said. "My husband transferred holding to me the day we married. Legally, documented, witnessed. For 11 months, the head of the Jiang organization has been a black waitress you hired to pour champagne." I let that land. "You've been planning a takeover of a company that already had an owner, and she was standing in the room the whole time. Bestie, I have never seen a man's face do what Byung-chul's face did. It was the exact moment a person realizes the ground they're standing on was never theirs, the face slap of it. He'd spent a year, a fortune, and every threat he had, and the thing he wanted had been one folded paper away, in the pocket of a woman he didn't even look at twice. And then the room shifted. Because here's the thing about men with guns who work for a criminal family. They follow power. And the second it became clear, with legal documents and a family seal, where the actual power in that room lived, some of those guards stopped looking at Byung-chul. They started looking at me. Byung-chul tried. Of course he tried. Men like that always make one last grab. "Documents can be destroyed," he said, and he nodded at his guards. "Take them from her." But Hyun-woo moved. For the first time in that whole nightmare, my husband was free to act. Because for the first time, the thing protecting him was out in the open and undeniable. He stepped between me and the guards, and he said, in a voice I'd never heard him use, a voice that filled the whole room, "The next man who takes a step toward my wife answers to the head of this family, and she's holding the seal." He looked around at them, at men he'd grown up around. "You all know the law of this house. You know who you serve." It was never him. He pointed at his uncle. It was always whoever holds what she's holding. So choose right now. And one by one the guards stood down. I'd love to tell you it took a big speech, or a fight, or some dramatic showdown. It didn't. It took a folded piece of paper and the simple, brutal logic of power. For Byung-chul had built his entire scheme on the belief that I was nobody. The whole thing collapsed the second that belief did. I'd called my lawyer, Grace, the one person besides Keisha I trust with my life, from the hallway while Byung-chul was still bragging. By the time the guard stood down, she was already on her way with the authorities and the documentation that proved Byung-chul had committed fraud, coercion, and about 9 other things in his attempt to seize control. He'd built a paper trail a mile long, because he was so sure he'd win that he never thought he'd need to hide it. Karma didn't need me to be cruel. Byung-chul did all the work himself. He walked out of that ballroom in handcuffs, past the white roses he'd bought to decorate his own theft, and the last thing he saw was me, the catering girl, holding the empire he'd thrown everything away to steal. The bride, Chaewon, I went to first. I pulled off her veil with my own hands and I told her it was over. Nobody was marrying anybody today. She was free. She cried so hard she could barely stand. Her family had sold her into this the same way Byung-chul had forced Hyun-woo, and she'd been just as trapped, just as alone in a room full of people who saw her as a transaction. I made sure she got home safe, and I made sure, with the authority I apparently now had, that the Do family understood that if they ever tried to trade their daughter like property again, they'd answer to the head of the Jang organization personally. That's me, by the way. Still getting used to saying it. And the months after, that's where the real glow-up happened, and it had nothing to do with the empire. For 11 months I'd been folding myself, smaller and smaller, living like a secret, working shifts where I wasn't allowed to be seen, telling myself that was just my life. When I finally stood up to my full height in that ballroom, I didn't just inherit control of an organization, I got myself back. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped flinching when people looked at me. People who'd known me as the quiet catering girl, the one who poured the drinks and disappeared, did not recognize the woman who walked into rooms now. Not because I looked different, because I'd finally stopped pretending to be smaller than I was. I used the authority I'd been handed to do the thing Hyun-woo's father had wanted all along. I started pulling the Jang organization out of the shadows, cutting loose the parts of it that hurt people, keeping the parts that were clean, and putting real distance between the family and the world that had nearly swallowed it. Byung-chul's whole network unraveled fast once the head of it was in handcuffs. The rival families who'd been circling backed off the second they understood. The seal had an owner who wasn't going anywhere. It turns out a lot of dangerous men are only dangerous when they think no one is holding the line. The waitress they hired to pour champagne walked out of that estate holding the seal to an empire. Not because she took it, because it was hers the whole time, hidden in plain sight, in an apron pocket, while a room full of dangerous men planned their futures around a woman they never bothered to see. Now, Bestie, here's the part that I didn't figure out until that night, and it's the part that put the whole thing back together for me. Remember how this started? A last-minute catering shift. A client who asked for me by name. The wrong door in a maze of identical doors that just happened to open onto the one room in that whole estate where everything was about to be decided. It wasn't an accident. That night, Hyun-woo told me the truth. His uncle had him completely boxed in, watched, isolated, every move monitored. He couldn't make a single call without it being intercepted. He couldn't get a message to anyone. The one card he had left was the seal in my pocket, but he had no way to get me into that room without his uncle realizing I mattered. So he did the one thing his uncle would never suspect. He had me hired as the help. He used a back channel, a favor from someone who owed his late father, and he got my agency the booking, and he made sure the client requested me by name. He got me into the building as catering staff, beneath notice, beneath suspicion, the last person in the world Byung-chul would look at twice. And then he trusted that, when I saw what was happening, I'd understand, that I'd remember what he gave me. That the woman he married would walk through the wrong door at the right moment and flip the whole table. He bet everything on me. The man at the altar, surrounded by guns, with no moves left, his entire plan was me. The waitress, the nobody, the one person his uncle would never see coming. And when I think back to that silent word his lips made across the ballroom, the one I thought was, run, the one that was really now. I understand it now. He wasn't asking me to save myself. He was telling me it was time to save us both. So when people ask me how I accidentally walked into my husband's secret wedding, I let them think it was an accident. But it was the most deliberate thing anyone ever did for me. He didn't hide me because I was weak. He hid me because I was the strongest card he had. And the day he needed to play me, he didn't apologize for it. He trusted me to win. Bestie, here's what that wrong door taught me. For 11 months, I thought I was a secret because I was something to be ashamed of. A wife you hide. A woman who isn't good enough for the daylight. I spent almost a year feeling small about it. Feeling like the thing you keep in a drawer. And then I found out the truth. I wasn't hidden because I was weak. I was hidden because I was the most important thing in the building. There is a difference between being overlooked and being underestimated, and the world will try to convince you they're the same thing. They are not. Being overlooked means you don't matter. Being underestimated means you matter so much that the people around you can't afford to see it yet. They put me in an apron and handed me a tray and decided I was nobody. And being nobody, it turned out, was the most powerful position in the room. Because nobody guards against the person they refuse to see. She walked away with everything. Not because she took it. Because it was always hers. The seal, the power, the choice, the man who trusted her with all of it. She just spent 11 months letting other people convince her that hidden meant small. The moment she understood that hidden meant protected, that hidden meant chosen, that hidden meant the whole plan, she won. And here's the part nobody tells you. The sweetest moment wasn't the handcuffs, or the empire, or the men with guns standing down. It was pulling that veil off a terrified stranger and telling her she was free. It was realizing that the power they accidentally handed me, I got to use to set someone else loose. That's not a revenge story. That's a homecoming. The difference is everything. So the next time someone makes you feel like the help, like the secret, like the one who pours the champagne and disappears, I need you to remember something. The person they refuse to look at is very often the only person in the room who can change everything. The world taught me to be ashamed of being invisible. It turns out invisible was never the weakness. It was the disguise. And the day I took the disguise off, every single person who'd looked right through me had to stand there and watch what they'd missed. Stay unseeable, Bestie. It's a superpower. Right up until the moment you decide to be seen. Question before you go. If you've ever been treated like the help, by people who had no idea who you really were, what's the one thing you wish you could have said the moment they finally saw you? Put it in the comments. I want to read every single one. Mafia Heartbeat, where the empire bows for her.